It was late evening when the cold began to settle over the quiet countryside, the kind of stillness that carries a strange unease with it, and as Thomas closed his shop for the night, he glanced at the road ahead, noticing nothing but dim streetlights flickering against the soft glow of frost. He had driven that path countless times before, a lonely stretch lined with barren trees, but this night felt different, like the silence held its breath. As his truck crawled forward, headlights cutting through the mist, something caught his eye just beyond the bend of shape and moving near the edge of the road. At first, he thought it was debris, maybe an abandoned bag or some trash left behind. But as he drew closer, he saw it wasn't an object at all. It was a German Shepherd, sitting completely still, its fur matted with snow, its body pressed against something smaller. And then he saw them two tiny pups curled tightly against the German Shepherd's side. Shivering violently in the cold, Thomas eased the truck to a stop, his heart hammering in his chest. The German Shepherd didn't move, didn't bark, didn't even growl. It just stared at him with eyes that told a story he couldn't yet understand. Something in that gaze made him step out of the truck despite the biting wind. As he got closer, he realized the German Shepherd was in bad shape, thin, exhausted, but refusing to leave the two pups. It wasn't just protecting them. It was shielding them with its own body like a living wall against the freezing air. Thomas crouched down, keeping his movements slow, thinking softly, and sure if the dog would attack or flee. But the German Shepherd didn't react. It simply lowered its head slightly, almost in a silent plea, as if it knew it couldn't keep the pups warm much longer. The pups whimpered weakly, their tiny bodies trembling. Thomas looked back at his truck, at the open road beyond, and for a split second, he hesitated. Bringing stray dogs into his home was not something he planned on doing. He barely had space for himself. But there was something about the way the German Shepherd's eyes locked onto his. Something about the quiet strength and desperate hope in that moment that left him unable to walk away. Without another thought, he reached out his arms slowly, gently scooping the pups into his jacket. The German Shepherd stiffened at first, eyes sharp, but then it seemed to understand this man wasn't a threat. He was trying to help. Thomas stood, cradling the pups, and looked down at the dog. "Come with me," he whispered softly. The German Shepherd hesitated for a heartbeat, then rose unsteadily to its feet, its body clearly weak but determined to follow. Together, they made their way back to the truck. Thomas opened the back door, carefully placing the pups inside. Their tiny whimpers muffled under his jacket. The German Shepherd climbed in without resistance, settling protectively beside them. As Thomas closed the door and sat in the driver's seat, he took one last look through the rearview mirror. The German Shepherd was staring back at him, its gaze no longer pleading, but watchful, almost as if it was silently thanking him. The drive back was quiet except for the soft breathing of the pups. Thomas's mind raced with questions. Where had this German Shepherd come from? How long had it been out there in the cold? Why had no one helped before now? He didn't have answers yet, but he knew one thing: opening that door had already changed something deep inside him. As the truck rolled into his driveway, the porch light casting a warm glow against the dark, he realized this was only the beginning of a story he couldn't have imagined. Because what he didn't know yet was that this decision, this single moment of kindness, would unravel secrets that would not only save the lives of the German Shepherd and her pups, but would uncover a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about loyalty, survival, and the unspoken bond between humans and dogs. Thomas carried the two trembling pups inside first, wrapping them gently in an old wool blanket he'd kept near the fireplace, their tiny bodies barely stirring as they nestled into the warmth. And when he turned back to the open door, the German Shepherd was standing there, hesitant, almost unsure if it was truly welcome beyond the threshold. He noticed she never truly rested, unless the pups were right beside her. Sometimes, in the evenings, she would walk to the back door, staring out into the dark woods beyond the property with a stillness that hinted at something, and finished, as if she was waiting for someone or something that would never return. Thomas started asking around the small town, checking missing dog reports, posting discreet notices online, but no one came forward. It was as if she had appeared out of nowhere. She stepped outside into the snow, her eyes scanning the darkness, and Thomas realized in that moment that the story wasn't finished. There was more out there. More than just her and the two pups. The cold night air swirled around it, carrying the faint scent of frost and something else, something faintly metallic that made Thomas pause. A woman in her late 50s stood there, holding a tattered photograph. She introduced herself as Margaret, a volunteer from a nearby animal rescue. She had seen the notice Thomas posted and recognized the German Shepherd immediately. She told him a story that made his chest tighten. The dog had been part of a larger rescue operation months ago, one involving an illegal breeding ring that had been shut down. Many dogs had been saved, but some had escaped into the woods before they could be collected. She was one of the mothers, Margaret said softly, her voice heavy with sorrow. She must have been hiding those pups somewhere safe, waiting for help that never came. Thomas felt his throat tighten. All this time, the German Shepherd had been alone, protecting her last two pups against the freezing cold, the hunger, and the dangers of the wild. As he crouched to look closer, he saw faint scars along the German Shepherd's neck, the kind that told a silent story of neglect or worse. She began following Thomas more freely, her eyes softening when he spoke. The pups grew stronger each day, their once weak cries now replaced with playful yips as they stumbled clumsily across the floor. But just as the house began to feel full of life again, something unexpected happened. Late one night, while Thomas was closing the windows against another round of snow, the German Shepherd suddenly perked up. Her ears shot forward, her body stiffened, and without a sound, she walked toward the door. Thomas followed, confused, and when he opened it, the cold air rushed in, but so did something else. Slowly, he extended his hand, letting the dog decide, and after a long moment, it stepped inside, paws silent against the wooden floor, its sharp eyes scanning the room before settling its gaze on the pups curled by the fire. Thomas fetched a bowl of warm water and gently placed it in front of the dog. It lowered its head slowly, drinking with careful sips, as if conserving what little energy it had left. He couldn't help but wonder how long it had been out there in the freezing cold, keeping those pups alive with nothing but its own body heat. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat in a chair near the fireplace, watching the German Shepherd curl its body protectively around the pups, even in the safety of a warm home. As if its instincts wouldn't allow it to rest completely. It didn't cry, didn't whimper, just stayed awake, alert, with a silent strength that spoke volumes. The next morning, Thomas decided to visit the local vet. He gently loaded the German Shepherd and the pups into the truck, the dog sitting quietly but keeping its eyes locked on the pups as if ensuring they weren't taken from her. At the clinic, the vet examined them carefully. The pups were malnourished but otherwise healthy. But the German Shepherd, her story was etched in her body. Old scars, calloused paws from walking long distances, and a microchip that revealed a name, not a nickname, but just a series of numbers linked to a breeder who had gone out of business years ago. She might have been abandoned, the vet said quietly, shaking her head. Or worse, left behind after being used for breeding. Thomas felt a pang of anger, but also a deeper sadness. How could someone discard a loyal creature like this, especially one that clearly would give everything for her pups? He drove back home in silence, the German Shepherd sitting beside him this time, looking out the window with an expression that felt almost human, tired but unbroken. Over the next week, a quiet routine formed. The German Shepherd began to trust Thomas, following him cautiously but closely, always returning to the pups after brief moments apart. One evening, after a particularly heavy snowstorm, there was a knock on Thomas's door. From that night onward, something changed. The German Shepherd no longer stood at the door as if wanting to leave. From the darkness beyond the porch, faint but distinct, came another sound, a bark, weak, distant, but familiar. The German Shepherd froze, her entire body trembling not from fear, but from recognition, and whatever was waiting in the darkness was about to change everything. Thomas stood frozen on the porch as the cold night air wrapped around him, the silence of the snowy woods broken only by that faint, distant bark echoing through the darkness. The German Shepherd was no longer hesitant. Her body leaned forward, ears pricked, tail stiff with alertness. A low whine slipping past her throat as if she was torn between staying with her pups inside and answering the call outside. And there, huddled against the splintered wall, was another German Shepherd, skinny, shivering, its eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. The rescued German Shepherd walked close beside him, never leaving his side as he made the long trek back home. By the time they reached the porch, Thomas was breathless, his arms aching, but he didn't stop. He laid the second German Shepherd on a thick blanket by the fire, and the first immediately lay beside it, licking its face gently, nudging it with quiet encouragement. Because a week later, a letter arrived at his doorstep, a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a photograph of the two German Shepherds from years ago, standing proudly in what looked like a training facility, and a single handwritten note that read, "They were once heroes. Thank you for bringing them home." The pups crawled toward the weak newcomer, their tiny tails wagging hesitantly as if they somehow understood. It was a fragile, tender reunion, one Thomas couldn't look away from. Thomas's heart clenched. This wasn't just another stray, but would recover with time, warmth, and food. And so Thomas stayed home from work, feeding small portions, gently cleaning wounds, keeping the fire burning late into the night. Slowly, the second German Shepherd began to improve, its eyes regaining a spark of life. And through it all, the first never left its side, even sleeping pressed against it, watching over it with unwavering devotion. Thomas realized this wasn't just about survival, it was about love, the kind of loyalty that couldn't be broken by hardship or time. The way the two German Shepherds locked eyes told him everything. The second German Shepherd gained weight, its fur grew glossier, and one day, for the first time, it stood on its own, walking slowly but surely toward the door. Thomas opened it, and the two German Shepherds stepped outside together into the soft morning light, the pups following close behind, their small footprints scattering in the snow. He watched them wander the yard as a family now whole, their eyes brighter than he'd ever seen. It was a simple moment, but it hit him with the weight of something profound. He hadn't just saved a dog, he had restored a family. They knew each other. They belonged to each other. The German Shepherd he'd rescued ran forward, lowering her head gently, touching noses with the weak one, a silent reunion filled with 1,000 unspoken words. It was clear now this was no random encounter. This was her mate, the missing piece of the family she had been waiting for. The weakened German Shepherd tried to stand but collapsed, too frail to move. Without hesitation, Thomas stepped forward, kneeling carefully in the snow. "It's okay," he murmured softly. He didn't know why, but he felt the weight of this moment, the gravity of what he was witnessing. The first German Shepherd turned to him with eyes that seemed to plead once again, not for herself this time, but for the one she loved. Thomas looked down at her, sensing this was not just any random sound. It meant something to her, something deeper, something beyond his understanding. Slowly, he whispered, "Go on," and with a single glance back at him, the German Shepherd stepped off the porch into the snow, her paws leaving soft prints in the fresh powder as she followed the sound. Thomas grabbed his jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and followed closely behind, his breath clouding in the sea air. The woods were silent except for the crunch of snow beneath their feet. The German shepherd moved with a strange urgency, weaving through trees, pausing only to sniff the ground before pressing forward again, the faint bark becoming clearer with every step. It was weak, trembling, almost like a cry for help, after what felt like an eternity. They reached a clearing near an old abandoned shed half collapsed under the weight of snow. Thomas slid his arms under the frail dog's trembling body, feeling the bones beneath the fur, and lifted it gently. The next few days were filled with careful nursing. Thomas brought in the vet again, who confirmed the second German shepherd was malnourished. As the days turned into weeks, the pups grew stronger, scampering around the living room with clumsy joy, their tiny barks filling the once quiet house with life. But as much as it felt like the end of a long journey, Thomas soon realized it was only the beginning. The mystery deepened. Who had sent the letter? And what kind of life had these dogs led before they ended up abandoned in the woods? The answers, Thomas would soon learn, were far more surprising than he could have imagined. Thomas stood on his porch holding the letter, the photograph trembling slightly in his fingers as the winter wind tugged at its edges. The image of the two German shepherds in a training yard stirred a strange feeling. There was strength in their stance, pride in their eyes, a confidence that spoke of purpose. The once frail mate had grown strong again, and together with the first German shepherd, they moved with a synchronicity that felt almost rehearsed. Like they remembered every command and mission they'd ever been a part of. A man stepped out older, with a posture that spoke of military precision, his eyes sharp but kind. When Cole offered to take them back, to give them a proper retirement with other surviving dogs from the unit, Thomas looked at the two German shepherds. Thomas framed one photo in particular, the one of the two German shepherds standing proud in their training days, and placed it above the fireplace where they now slept, no longer just survivors, no longer forgotten heroes, but family. The snow melted, the silence faded, and the story of two German shepherds who were once heroes and who found their way back to love became a quiet legend whispered in the small town. A story that would never be forgotten. As months passed, the pups grew into strong, healthy young dogs, each carrying a glimmer of their parents' quiet bravery. And every time Thomas opened his door, whether it was to let them out into the yard or to welcome a neighbor stopping by, he felt that same reminder deep in his heart that sometimes the smallest act of kindness, the simple choice to open a door, can change not just one life but many. They weren't just dogs he'd rescued, they had become family. And yet, he saw the way they looked at Cole, the way they stood by him as if a part of them remembered the days they were heroes. It was a moment of quiet understanding. They belong with you, Thomas finally said, his voice low. Cole shook his head softly. No, he replied, they belong where they're loved. And they've clearly found that here. He introduced himself simply as Cole, a former handler from the same canine unit. He had been searching for these dogs for years, tracing rumors and leads across counties. When Thomas invited him inside, the German shepherds froze for a moment, then suddenly rushed toward him, not with aggression, but with recognition. They wiped their tails, circling him, nudging his hands, their eyes bright with a spark Thomas hadn't seen before. Cole knelt down, tears forming in his eyes as he whispered, "You remember me, don't you?" His voice cracked as he explained that these two German shepherds, once known only by their unit numbers, had saved over a dozen lives during a building collapse years ago. Digging through rubble for trapped survivors, they were the best in the unit. But after the program was shut down, the dogs were sent to an unethical breeder who used them until they could no longer produce litters, eventually abandoning them. Cole had been trying to track them ever since, hoping to bring them home. Sometimes, Thomas would catch them standing in the yard at dusk, side by side, scanning the horizon with a calm vigilance that reminded him they were always on alert for something. Even if they no longer needed to be, the pups grew more playful, their clumsy little bodies tumbling over each other in the snow, blissfully unaware of the hardships their parents had endured. And yet, amidst the warmth of this newfound family, the mystery of the letter lingered in Thomas's mind. Who had sent it? Why now? And why only a photograph with such cryptic words? But how could dogs like these, once clearly trained and cared for, have ended up abandoned in the woods, starving and alone with their pups? He turned the photograph over, hoping for more clues. And there it was, a faint handwritten note, smudged but legible. Unit 7K9, last deployed Springfield. Heroes once forgotten. Thomas didn't know what it meant. But he couldn't shake the thought that there was more to their story than just being discarded. Breeding dogs, he decided to visit Margaret, the woman from the animal rescue, hoping she might know more. When he showed her the photograph, her eyes widened, her hand covering her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I know these dogs." She explained that years ago, there was a special canine unit used not just for police work but for disaster rescues. A unit of highly trained German shepherds who saved countless lives during natural disasters and search missions. But when funding was cut and the program shut down, many of the dogs were sold off or sent to breeders. Some vanished entirely. These two, she realized, must have been part of that forgotten program, dogs who had once risked their lives alongside humans, only to be abandoned when they were no longer seen as useful. Thomas felt a wave of anger and sadness wash over him, but it also made sense. The scars, the way they moved, the quiet intelligence in their eyes. They weren't just survivors. They were once heroes. As days passed, the German shepherds began to settle fully into Thomas's life. One morning, as Thomas was chopping wood behind the house, a black SUV slowly pulled up the driveway. Thomas listened, feeling a deep ache in his chest for everything these loyal creatures had endured. In the end, they stayed. Cole visited often, bringing old photographs and stories of their past missions, filling in the blanks of their forgotten history. And somewhere in the woods beyond, where their paw prints once marked a path of struggle,